Let me introduce you to the practice question planner from thecalculatorguide.com, which has been designed for teachers, examiners and education content creators to help create and organise the questions that they write for exam papers, textbooks, topic tests, or even whiteboard questions. The practice question planner helps you save time and energy by keeping all your practice question ideas in one place. It's a handy notebook that you can carry around with you, so that as soon as you get an idea for a question that you might want to include within a project that you're creating, you can get that idea down as quickly as possible in an organised, structured fashion, so that you can then collate them later, write them up in neat and produce your test paper or your test set of questions. The practice question planner has been designed primarily for mathematics and STEM subject teachers, lecturers and educators, but is flexible enough to be able to use by any subject teacher. It's been designed to help record the questions that you create to focus towards the needs of your students, and helps you to create and compile questions for a mixed question practice paper or a test perhaps on a specific topic. Let's take a look inside a planning page. If we zoom in on the top section here, on the left hand side we've got a section for inspiration or reference question. This is to make reference to the location of any question which might be an inspiration to the question that you're writing. So maybe you've seen a question in a textbook, say question 5C on page 29 of a textbook. You might want to write a question that's similar or covers a similar theme to that particular question, so you could write in the location of that here in the inspirational reference question section. Or perhaps you've seen a question on paper 1 of the June 2018 exams that you might want to model. Now it's important here obviously to mention that you shouldn't copy a question, because they may be copyrighted material owned by another author, but you can take inspiration from a particular question, maybe cover a similar theme or a similar structure to a question that's already been written. And so this section helps you just to reference where you might be taking that inspiration from. On the right hand side of the top there, we've got relevant qualification, and this is just a space to fill in the qualification or qualifications that your question might be concerning. So that could be GCSE maths or GCSE statistics, A-level maths, A-level further maths, or perhaps a science subject, GCSE chemistry, GCSE physics, etc. So whatever qualification that this question might be aimed at, you've got a space up there just to make note of it. Now on the next line we've got question number and to be included in paper number, so you can fill these out at the start when you're writing your question if you know where your question is going to be located, or you can leave that until a little bit later. The question number will be the order number in which the question will appear, whether you're writing a section of a textbook or whether you're writing an exam paper or a topic test paper. This will be the question number, and to be included in paper number, this is referring to the compilers at the end of the book. It helps you to allocate where this question is going to be used. Assessment objectives covered, well that's making reference to the specification of the relevant qualification. Now typically if you have a look at a specification, there are number and lettered codes to the different content requirements of that particular qualification. So if we take for example GCSE statistics from Pearson Edexcel, so you might want to write a question on calculating the skewness of data, and by having a look at the specification you can see that that is the assessment objective 2A09, and so you could write that here as reference to what objective is going to be covered by your question. The real advantage of doing that is that then you can make sure that if you're writing a mixed paper, say a mixed topic test or a mock exam paper, you could then make sure that a broad variety of different assessment objectives are covered by your final paper. Below that we have the start of the question section. This is where you'd actually write your question. We've got lines on there to keep everything in sentence structures. This is about half of the section for writing your question. Obviously there's also space in there, potentially you can write down ideas and notes as well as your actual question. And on the right hand side we've got a sketch area. So there's two reasons why this might be useful. Maybe your question involves drawing a sketch. So for example if you're asked to sketch a graph, or you're asking to sketch a graph, maybe you might want to do a sketch of the graph there just to test out how it would look, or make reference to if you're producing the mark scheme a little bit later on, you might want to have an example of the sketch. Or it might be useful if you need a sketch just to put your ideas together for a question. Say if you're asking a question regarding triangles, maybe the angles or an area of a triangle, you might want to draw that particular triangle just to test out how it all works. So that sketch area is free and blank for you to use however you see fit. So in the midsection of the paper, we've got the remaining area to write the rest of your question, plenty of space to do that. And there's also a 20 by 20 section of graph paper. So again, this is dual purpose really. Maybe your question asks you to specifically draw a graph, labeling coordinates, etc. that needs to be on graph paper so that everything is drawn accurately. But additionally, it could be an extra sketch area just with some more structure, so with lines on there to help you draw, say if you're asking a question regarding triangles, rectangles, etc., or something that requires a structure, you can use the graph paper to help you out there. Below that, we have a section for the mark scheme. Now, typically you'll find that it's a lot easier to write the answers or the mark scheme to a question as you're writing the question, and here's the space to do it. And on the right hand side, we have mark allocation, which is very useful if you're writing a multi-section question, so parts A, B, C, etc. You want to allocate a certain number of marks for each section of the question. So part A might be worth 2 marks, part B might be worth 3 marks, etc. And you can look back on previous questions that are written that are similar to yours to get an idea on how many marks to allocate for each section of the question. At the very bottom, we have a space for additional notes and also for total marks, so you can sum the marks of your question there from the mark allocation section. And at the very bottom there, we have a page number, very useful for referencing your question, particularly when we get to the question compilers. You can reference which question is going to go where, nice and quick, just to check the page numbers, you get directly to where your question is. Let's take a look at the compilers at the back. So there is 4 per practice question planner of these compilers. Let's just zoom in on the top section there. We've got paper number, so that's particularly useful if you're writing maybe an exam paper that has multiple papers. So you might want to allocate them paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, or you might want to, if you're doing a series of multiple papers, just write how far along you are with those particular papers, or I'm on paper number 12, etc. And if it's got a particular title, at this stage you can also write that in here. Say for example GCSE mock exam number 3. Subjects covered, well, that can just be a general category, particularly if you're writing a topic test. You might want to just label there what topic is covered in this particular set of questions, so maybe sine rule, cosine rule, etc. Or you might want to just label it as mixed or multi-question paper, etc. if there's lots of different assessment objectives covered. And relevant qualification, they can just finalise what qualification that this particular set of questions is going to be used for. And then we've got question number, and you can have up to 30 per compiler. We've got a sentence there, roughly what's covered in the question. So there you could perhaps briefly describe the topic or topics covered by your question. And don't forget that the question number here could be referenced back to the question number section on the top of the planning pages. So you can wait until you're compiling your questions together at the end to then allocate a question number. Page number, well, that is the page number of the planning page where your question is located. And once again, you can copy down the assessment objectives covered as well. That's to ensure, particularly if you're doing a mixed topic paper, that you're covering lots of different assessment objectives. So the last section just covers their transcribe to print. What I imagine that you want to do is to write these questions up in neat. Now, what you might find is that when you have an idea for a question, the genesis of a question, you might want to get it down as quickly as possible, and that's where the plan's really useful. You can just write them down as quickly as you can. Take the planner with you, just write them down in a break, at lunchtime, just when you get home, and you don't have to think necessarily about booting up your computer and writing it all out in neat. It's basically the creation process. But when you want to actually create your paper, you might want to type it up in neat on the computer. And what you can do here is, once you've actually transcribed the question into a digital version, you can then just tick off the box there and say that's been transcribed to print, and it lets you know how far along you are in completing your paper. The practice question planner has been designed with a variety of colours and cover designs and is available to buy at Amazon. So get one today and create and build a bank of your own unique questions for your own resources and practice papers.